Hello and welcome to episode 99 of the Wisdom from the Akashic podcast. I can't quite believe that we are almost at episode 100, but I am truly grateful for everyone who has been on this podcast journey with me from the start, who is maybe new to the podcast and you're deep diving into all the past episodes. I truly am grateful for every single one of you, everybody who comments on the podcast, rates the podcast, shares the podcast with their friends, and reaches out to me and lets me know how helpful you find the podcast. I absolutely love making the podcast and doing a deep dive into these types of topics for you all. So I just wanted to say thank you for being here. Today, I want to talk about the light grid. Okay, you will have heard me refer to the light grid numerous times over the past 98 episodes. And I want to talk about the light grid today in respect of conversations that are out there around the biofield, because the biofield and the light grid are essentially the same thing. And I think it's important to understand what this light grid biofield is, the history behind it, and also how you can, of course, start working with your own. So this idea of the light grid, the biofield, is this idea that you are much more than your physical form. Okay. Now, I think everybody who's listening knows this, but of course, from a mainstream perspective, this is not always considered the case. And the work that's being done in respect of the biofield and research into that is essentially science's way of catching up with what spiritual practitioners, mystics, yogis for thousands of years have known, that we are not just this physical form. Now, of course, there is some controversy still in the scientific community about whether or not the biofield exists. But essentially, the idea with the biofield is that we have these subtle bodies and we have this force moving through us. So this vital life force, this prana, this chi, this ki, whatever tradition you look at. And the existence of these additional layers or these additional bodies has existed throughout esoteric and spiritual traditions from the beginning of time. So you may have heard this referred to in the Eastern traditions as the koshas. You may have heard about the aura, or of course you may have heard about the light grid in the Akashic records. It's all the same thing, different names for talking about the same thing. The idea that there are these subtle bodies that are still you, but are not the physical form. They are connected to the physical form and they impact directly the physical form, but they are not the same thing. I think it's worth noting that back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, there was a lot of scientific leaning towards the study of these subtle bodies. Okay. It was a Russian scientist whose name I'm not very good with pronunciation, but it's Gurwitch, I believe. And he coined this term, the morphogenetic field. And they were looking at embryology and looking at this field around the embryo that contained information. Okay. This idea that when you take a seed or you take an embryo, around that is a field which contains the information that goes into the embryo or the seed and brings out the final form. So when you, for example, connect to this morphogenetic field of a seed, you're able to see it looks like the end plant. It doesn't look like the seed itself. Well, this work was all being done, and there was work being done around this thing called the biofield, this morphogenetic field, this electromagnetic field. This was all work that was being done. What seems to happen with, of course, events that are happening in society, and please do go and, research if you're interested in that early research, do go and look into it all. It's all available online. But what seems to happen is that this kind of studies start to be dismissed. It starts to be disregarded as woo-woo. And what we have to sometimes look at is, has something been completely dismissed scientifically? Has it been disproven completely? Or has it perhaps been taken out of the mainstream and moved into more private sectors? And the reason that this is important is because when you're talking about something as powerful as the biofield or the light grid, sometimes there are individuals, people, societies, etc., that do not want you to know your own power. They do not want you to know about these things. So I find it quite strange that there was a lot of research done in the early 1900s around this. Again, of course, mystics, yogis have been talking about these different layers for thousands of years. So this is nothing new, but it actually being looked at from a scientific perspective, a Western scientific perspective, this was new. And then all of a sudden it seems to disappear. Of course, from a cultural perspective, there's lots of things happening in the world at that time, so we can understand that. And what we're seeing now, thankfully, is more people coming out and actually starting to talk about this biofield, this what we would call in the Akashic records, the light grid, which is great news. And it's a great indicator that even within the more scientific communities, that people are starting to pick this up and research it, which can only be a good thing. So why does any of this matter? Why am I making a podcast episode about it? A lot of what you're doing on your spiritual path and your spiritual development, and your spiritual practices is working with your light grid or working with your biofield. You might not call it that, but that's what it is. And working, of course, with your prana, with your life force energy. This is what you're doing on your spiritual journey. Now, understanding the light grid or the biofield and how it interacts with the subtler planes of existence, because these subtle bodies are what interact with the higher dimensions of consciousness, can help you, of course, not only understand yourself and what's going on with you, but also what's going on with actual reality and move towards spiritual sovereignty. We know that the human eyes see approximately 0.0035% of light, of the visual waves that are available. Okay, this is a tiny, tiny percentage. We don't see infrared, we don't see UV. We also know, as we're on our spiritual journey, that light is information. But we can't see most of the light. We can't see the different information that's coming in. So we need to have our light grid, our biofield, as strong as possible so that we can feel, that we can know, that we can hear, that we can receive, that we can see what's coming in to us. And this is why people like me will continually talk about this internal technology and working with this internal technology, okay? Because it's this light grid or this biofield that's really going to help you understand what is actually going on from a much bigger picture perspective than just what we're limited to in physical reality. Similarly, with hearing, we are extremely limited in what we can hear. The human range is between 20 hertz and 20,000 hertz. Again, this is a tiny fraction. There is no percentage defined for this one because the total sound spectrum is infinite. Okay, so we're very limited in this form. And that's one of the things that we actually choose to come and experience is this limitation. So we need to accept that. We need to accept that we have this thing called a light grid or a biofield, and we need to start working with it so we can pick up on what's going on. Now, in a lot of the ancient spiritual traditions and esoteric traditions, they talk about reality being made up of light and sound, so you can see how limited we are in our perception of actual reality if we're only relying on our physical senses. But it's our internal technology that's going to help us work with, connect to this light grid. So we now understand that we have this light grid, we have a biofield, we know that we're impacted by light and sound from different planes and different dimensions of existence. But why is it important for you to be working consciously with your light grid, even if you can't necessarily see it or feel it or know it, or you don't know how yet to connect to it? Why is this so important? Okay. Number one is you need to know your resonant frequency. Your resonant frequency is your baseline. But in order to evolve and expand, which is what you're doing on your spiritual journey, you need to know your starting point. And you can start to understand that when you start to work with your light grid. You can start to alter your level of beingness, which is what you're doing on this journey, when you know where you're starting from. Now, of course, this is often where solitude comes in on the spiritual journey, because you need to spend time with yourself, by yourself, in your own energy to really understand what this resonant frequency is. And of course, you can use modalities such as working with the Akashic Records to really help. Okay, where am I at? What's my starting point? And from there, then, of course, expansion can happen. The second reason that this is important is stuff gets stored in your light grid. Okay, so throughout lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, you're going to go through certain things. You're going to go through certain experiences. You're going to have certain emotional reactions. This happens in this lifetime and all of the lifetimes that you've ever had on planet Earth and anywhere else. This information and this energetic stagnation often gets stored in the light grid. So by understanding and working with your light grid, where things are stored, how you can start to move them through, you can start to strengthen this light grid. And this, of course, is what we do in the Akashic Records when we're doing clearing. We are working with the light grid and clearing it out. So you can learn how to do this for yourself, which is what we'll be doing in January in level 1. You'll be learning how to start working with this light grid. And then when it comes to level 3, it's helping other people work with their light grid. So doing this energetic healing and clearing as a practitioner. And we do get into the structure of the light grid a lot more in level 3 because it's more important in level 3. In level 1, it's more just an introduction for you working with your own light grid. Once you understand where things are and what's going on and how it's stored, then you can move on. This moving on is this expansion. It's this building of this light body. Okay, this is what the ascension process is. It's building this light body, this immortal body. The third reason that this is important is because we are constantly receiving inputs into our field from life. Okay, so whether that's through your interactions with other people, whether that's different beings from different dimensions, whether that's the energy of the collective, you're constantly receiving information into this grid. And in order to be able to sift through this and discern, okay, what is helpful, what is supportive of my evolution and what is not, you have to be able to work with your grid and discern where it comes from. So, for example, if you're picking up a lot of the frequency of fear, that is not supportive of your spiritual evolution. So it doesn't mean that you should avoid it. It just means you need to acknowledge it, see it for what it is, and work to transmute it or move it through the grid rather than getting stuck in it. Similarly, if you're experiencing the frequency of love a lot, that's great. That's supportive of the spiritual evolutionary path. The fourth reason that this is important is because you want your field to be as strong as possible, especially over the coming years. So if there are people or beings or a devolutionary stream, which there absolutely is, want to start messing with your light grid or with your biofield, that you can recognize that there is this outside force coming in that's trying to manipulate, tamper your field, and you can work to reject that and understand what's going on. Okay, now I don't say that to scare anybody, but we have to understand the power that this light grid has. You as a fractal of source consciousness, you as a divine form are very, very powerful. And if there are certain elements within society that don't want you to remember your power, your divinity, and want to perhaps manipulate things to their own advantage, a good place to start is by saying, okay, this biofield, this light grid doesn't exist. It's all woo-woo and nonsense. And then also move towards manipulation of it. So I'm sure by now you can see why working with this field, this light grid, is so important. And hopefully you're all now asking the question, okay, well, how do I do this, Susie? How do I work with my light grid? You've convinced me it's important. I understand what it is now. How do I do it? Honestly, all traditional spiritual practices are designed to work with your light grid, with your biofield, with your prana. Okay? So practices such as breath work, so pranayama, meditation, yoga asana, body work, so any somatic practices, these are all designed to work with this. So you really don't need anything outside of yourself to work with your own light grid. This is one of the amazing things about it. You have everything you need within you to work with this field. It just takes time, patience, and practice. And there's no quick fix, there's no magic pill. Now, what you can do, of course, is you can use modalities that are supportive. So, of course, the Akashic Records is very much connecting into the light grid. That's what we're working with. You can spend time in nature. Nature is very, very healing towards the light grid. Lots of people will feel that when they're out there. Connecting into anything that is natural rather than artificial or synthetic. So, trees, flowers, the sea, the sky, sitting out in the night sky. This is all very good stuff for the health of your light grid. As I said earlier, time in solitude. So you actually start to understand your light grid and what it's made of. Different healing modalities that you can work with. So anything that is energy work essentially is working with the light grid that may be not what they call it. It may be they call it something different. But when you're working with energy work, this is the field that you're working with, especially if you're going to include light or sound, of course, because they're going to really help you tune into what's going on. And lastly, really remembering your divinity. So remembering that the human form is divine, that you are part of this hierarchy where you have all of these higher spiritual beings who are all there to help support you and help you on this journey, even though I know sometimes it can feel alone, but remembering that and treating yourself accordingly. So this is not to say you have to live like an absolute saint or you can't eat this, you can't do that, because that's just dogma and it's not helpful. But you know yourself, you know your own body. What does your body need? What does your body respond well to? What does it not respond well to? And start treating it as the divine form that it is. So I hope that you found this helpful. I'm going to be doing a class at the back end of 2026 that's going to include a lot more about this because that's the Akashic alignment class. Again, it's deepening your relationship to your Akashic records. So you can get an introduction of working with the light grid in level 1. If you want to start helping other people with their light grids, that's level 3. And then I'm going to do this separate class, which is deepening that own personal practice. So introduction level 1, and then we'll get into deepening it in Akashic alignment. But I do hope you found this episode helpful. It's given you some food for thought, and I shall see you next week for the next episode.